I'd like to invite my colleague, Alli Blount, to the stage for our next session with Hevolution on healthy aging. Thank you, Alli.
That's a bit of a tough act to follow, but if everyone could take their seats, I'm really excited to be here for the next session. All right. Good morning, everyone. Please help me to welcome to the stage our next speaker, Dr. Mehmood Khan of Hevolution.
Let's
Get cozy here.
working.
Your microphone should be on.
It's on.
So
I think we're.
yeah, I think we're in the middle of a post Gavi exodus, but we'll try to keep the energy up. So let's go ahead and get started, Dr. Mehmood. So the 20th century saw a remarkable rise in lifespan, but not necessarily health span. So could you explain for our audience the implications of that shift, just to set the stage here?
Well, let me just to kick us off, look at this at a macro level and look at the implications of this. We've made dramatic progress. Vaccination was an important part of that. Fetal mortality, infant mortality has come down. HIV, all of these were contributing to, in a lot of part of the world, premature mortality. And so we've seen life expectancy around the world, on average, go up by 20 to 30 years over the last 50, 60 years. So that's been great progress, right? Life expectancy went from the late 40s, early 50s age group up into the 75 and in some countries 80. However, of that 30 years, we've seen about 20 years of that now accompanied by chronic disease. Whether it's cardiovascular, dementia, diabetes, cancers, all of these. Our health systems globally are not prepared in any country on the planet today to take care of that very substantial disease burden. Not in the United Kingdom, not in the US, not in Europe, let alone in low or middle income countries. So the implications of this are not just for ministers of health, but for ministers of finance who have to come up with the resources to support this dramatic increase in cost of healthcare.
Yeah, and can you talk a bit about some of the specific challenges associated with current healthcare models when it comes to active aging, particularly in low and middle income countries?
So we've clearly recognized for a long time that in any country, developed or otherwise, primary healthcare and preventive medicine is way lagging. One of my favorite statistics is in the United States, the support for schools of public health and primary care, adjusted for inflation, has been going down for the last 30 years. And yet, cost of medicine has continued to go up. So there's an uncoupling in preventive medicine anyway, and preventing age-related diseases, which now account in the developed world for up to 2/3 of healthcare costs, are actually what's lagging, and we do not have that ability. Our health system is an interventional model. You get sick, you go and engage with the health system. When you, quote, recover, you disengage. It is an episodic care. There's really not a life journey care. Aging cannot be addressed through episodic healthcare models. Unfortunately, much of the lower middle income countries have continued to emulate this developed country Western model of healthcare, which has built lots of hospitals, lots of cancer centers, lots of diagnostics, and when you're sick, we'll be able to take care of you.
Right. So what I'm hearing is current models are grounded in an intervention versus prevention model, and what we need to do is really start focusing on prevention. What strategies can countries around the world implement to effectively respond to an aging population to improve health span?
So let me start with 3 striking statistics that always remind me of why I'm working in this area. Today on the planet, there are more people over age 60 than under age 5. It's the first time in human history the world's population has more people above 60 than under the age of 5. Think of the implication of that over the next 20 or 30 years as the population continues to age and we have very few children to take their place, and support the care that that aging population needs. Second statistic, by 2050, the population of people over 60 is going to go from 1 billion on the planet today to 2 billion. The population is going to double. And the pyramid that we've been used to as we were growing through our schooling is now inverting. Some countries already has. So that's the challenge of doing. So what can be done about it? Number one, we have to think about our healthcare delivery models. We've already touched on that. Second, and I would refer, since we don't have a lot of time, to people, if you go to the U.S. National Academy of Medicine's website, there is a global roadmap on aging that I had the privilege to be part of the commission that helped write that. I would ask you to look at it. It's a 250-page document that includes developing and developed country input, since it was a global roadmap. Some key areas, not only the usual lifestyle, environment, city design, infrastructure, all those things are touched on and are going to be critical. The other piece that there's less, but progress is being made, and I will come back to democratization in a minute, the technologies to diagnose aging and the technologies to change the biology of aging are no longer Star Trek future theoretical science. The science is actually progressing very rapidly. It is on the cusp. We have amazing publications that are now coming out of academic centers around the world saying this is not inevitable. However, what really scares me and worries me as a leader in the field is not will we solve the technical challenges of keeping our tissues and our bodies healthy for longer, not living longer. Let me be very clear. This is about staying healthy for as long as possible. Instead of 10 or 20 years of disease, how do we shrink that period? The challenge is how do you democratize those technologies to have impact globally? Because what we're seeing is the majority of people who will be over 60 are going to be in low and middle income countries. The economic impact is huge if you're successful. This has been done by Professor Andrew Scott, who's modeled the economics of this. However, the divide between the haves and have-nots, purely on GDP productivity, will only widen unless we can figure out how to scale these technologies and get them into the hands of the populations where the impact can be had.
Thank you. So it's, I believe, Hevolution's first year here at WHA. I know you're keen to engage with this community of global health leaders that we have here. How do you envision engaging with stakeholders, both traditional healthcare sphere and outside of that, to support this shift that you'd like to make toward healthier aging?
If we think about the different sectors that need to embrace and understand and integrate this from a value chain, and I don't mean value chain from a product, but the value chain from science to delivery, we have a number of sectors, and we're engaging with all of them. Obviously, upstream, we need to understand the science, but even before that, we're actually engaging with communications, media, the public sector, because this is a field that it lends itself to be misunderstood. If you go to somebody and say that we're interested in healthy aging, they have visions of some expensive spa. My wife wants me to discover the next wrinkle cream. You name it, that is the image of healthy aging. We need to take that on. Secondly, there are what I call pseudoscience players in this space that are willing to sell hocus pocus. Right? We need to differentiate and build this on credible science. So media, communications is important. The science community is the engine to drive forward the inventions. We, Hevolution, are the second largest funder of aging biology and neuroscience in the world, second only to the US NIH. We actually provide more funding in neuroscience than the UK government, than the European Union. Very few people, other than the scientific community, are aware of that. As an example, last year we committed to $300 million US of research funding across the world in the science of aging and the biology of aging. And we're now continuing to scale that up. So the scientific community. The third is we also recognize if you're going to bring science to the market, whether it's private sector or government, you cannot get it in the hands of consumers and patients until you bring the private sector in. You just heard it in vaccines. You need the private sector at the table. To enable that, you need capital. both venture capital, but then also ultimately large-scale capital. We actually have our own venture capital fund where 100% of the profits of our fund go back into our foundation. That allows us to patiently invest in this science and bring it in and incubate companies or invest in companies, and we're already doing that. The fourth is to actually convene and get the policymakers at the table. Because, and by the way, the first people on our list of policymakers is not ministers of health. I know we're at the WHO. It's the ministers of finance. Unless you get this in the minds of ministers of finance, the ministers of health are forced to take whatever is given. And I'm a healthcare professional. Having been on the receiving end, I fully recognize that countries have to prioritize, and in that prioritization comes health. So finance ministers have to understand the GDP benefit, the business opportunities, all of those things for them to be willing to invest in this. We are friends of the ministries of health. We want the ministers of finance to understand that. So we're engaging with those. And finally, the regulator. Unlike cancer or diabetes, this is an area that is so new, there is no path to market. There's no such thing, there's not a single government that actually has a regulatory path to bring a drug or a diagnostic to market that can address aging. Not one. And unless we do that, then the private sector is not going to come to the table. So several areas, and we're engaged with all of these areas.
Right. Second biggest funder of healthy aging work in the world, you said. So
the geroscience, we're specifically focusing our funding on the science side, on the biology of aging.
So if you're working on this topic or want to understand where your work sits in global health against this is your guy.
I just lead a team.
Well, find Dr. Mehmood and his team this week. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to wrap up with kind of a final call to action, recognizing there may not be a silver bullet here. But I mean, you've talked about ministers of finance, right? Policymakers, these different stakeholders. What specific action or actions can these different groups take, individuals, business, policy, to contribute to this mission to achieve healthy longevity for all?
There are some countries that are taking action already. There are some countries that have either appointed or actually in the process of appointing ministers of aging, separate to ministers of health. So they're recognizing that this is a national imperative. Some countries, it's not rocket science. When 40% of your population are over the age of 60, you don't have enough young workers to take care of that 40%. South Korea is a good example. The second, birth rates have dramatically fallen. That's a good thing. And I'll give you the Middle East. The GCC, the birth rate used to be around 6. Everybody says it's a young population. The birth rate now is just under 2.2. Replacement rate is 2.17. Now, governments are acting. So we can get into that whole bucket. The second call to action is to actually engage the scientific and healthcare community to make this an area of interest for young professionals to want to focus their brilliant minds on. 30 years ago, when I came out of medical school, now I'm aging myself 40 years ago, the specialty to be in was cardiology, oncology, diabetes. I happen to be an endocrinologist. Nobody thought about wanting to be in the specialty of aging. Well, when 40% of your population is over the age of 60, that's going to need a lot of healthcare professionals, not just physicians, who can take care of that population. For those of you from developing countries or lower middle income countries, you do not have the infrastructure to take care of that population. Building more nursing homes is not the answer. So copying what was done in the UK or North America or Europe is not the answer for the developing world, so to speak. What is the solution in an environment where it's a pay-forward system? The young population takes care of the previous generation. Let me leave you, since we're short of time, there's a significant gender bias with this. 2/3 of social care of the elderly is done by a woman globally. It's either the daughter or the daughter-in-law that takes care of the elderly parent. It's not the son, it's usually the spouse. And so what that has as implications is unpaid, unrecognized, and career limiting. So we really have to think about how this is going to be taken. And finally, migration from poor countries to wealthy countries might give you remittances, But the elderly people that got left behind in the village don't even have their own young people to take care of those elderly while the young population is away working. Migration not only into other countries, but migration from villages into urbanization means the elderly got left behind. Look at the demographics of what's happened in China. There's great statistics from, for example, the Chinese urban versus rural. This is playing across the world in Asia, India, South Asia, Africa. We have to be thinking about it now. That's the call of action, because we cannot wait. It's happening now.
Really strong final thought there. And you can take my job bang on time, watching the clock. Thank you so much
Thank you
for joining us. And thank you to Hevolution, our partners.
Thank you. Take care.